Do you want to be happier and wiser? Born at the world famous Harvard Innovation Labs, Mind Brain Emotions award winning skill building card games are here to help. These cleverly simple and practical cards boost emotional intelligence, stress management, and critical thinking skills, perfect for homes, schools, and workplaces. I have their 52 essential relationship skills cards, and I've used it at home and in my therapy practice. We are giving a free deck to our listeners. Go to mindbrainemotion.com/EQ. Again, mindbrainemotion.com/EQ to enter, watch how we use the deck, and take the free EQ and coping assessments today. Welcome to Season 5 of the Color Success Podcast, where we talk with guests from AAPI and ethnic minority communities and have real discussions about mental health and what success looks like. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. Before we get into it, remember to subscribe to our mailing list for free at colorsuccesspodcast.com so you don't miss any updates. There, you will find our socials, YouTube channel, and all episodes on streaming platforms for great additional content. I have two YA authors today. Abigail Hing Wen is a filmmaker and the New York Times bestselling author of novel Loveboat, Taipei, a Barnes & Noble YA book club pick, which has been adapted to the screen starring Ashley Liao, Hunger Games, and Ross Butler, Shazam! 13 Reasons Why. The companion novels Loveboat Reunion and Loveboat Forever, forthcoming in November 2023, follows the gang and their community through new coming-of-age journeys. In her works, Abigail explores neurodiverse characters struggling to navigate learning, social and cultural differences, as well as characters in high-pressure situations struggling with mental health issues. With a knack for trying and succeeding at new things, according to Forbes, Abigail has been described by pop culturists as one of the voices of her generation. She holds degrees from Harvard, Columbia, and Vermont College of Fine Arts, and lives with her husband and two children in the San Francisco Bay Area. I.W. Gregorio is a practicing neurologist by day, masked avenging YA writer by night. She is the author of the Schneider Award-winning This Is My Brain in Love, an Amazon Best Book, and the Lambda Literary Finalist, None of the Above. She is a founding member of We Need Diverse Books, and as an ally, a proud board member of Interact, Advocates for Intersex Youth. Hi, Eileen and Abigail. I'm super excited to have you on the show. I love YA, so thank you so much for reaching out.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
It's really wonderful to be here. Thank you, Steph.
So let's jump right in. What led you guys to write YA books, particularly with representation of our various cultures, as well as intersectionality of quite a few aspects?
Well, when I think back to the books that shaped who I am, they were all books written for children and teens. And I also think back to when I was the most voracious reader, when I was a person growing up in like the upstate, like central New York, where I was like the only person of color in my school. Books were my best friends. And I always grew up hoping that I could establish connections with readers the way that those books influenced me and made me the person that they are and basically created my moral code.
And I mean, you have so much going on. And I read some of your bio and you're like, yeah, legit, I don't sleep. And I'm similar and I have like multiple hats and hands in different pots, but I make sure that I actually get a lot of sleep. It's a problem actually, because I'm like, I'm not going to wake up early. So how do you, I heard from, on CNN for the Hive CEO, that he's interested in work-life harmony versus work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different concept and a different way to think about it, that work is not necessarily our enemy, but how can we look at the harmony? So thinking about that, how have you been able to possibly have some harmony in all these aspects of your life?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think obviously the first part is having the right partner and parent, because in addition, it's not only my medical life and my life as a writer, it's also my life as a parent, and that's the part where things get really tricky because you're not, but also where it's also easier because you're not in it alone. In terms of balancing the medicine and writing, I feel like it's all sort of all different sides of the same coin. In that, obviously there's a storytelling element to writing a YA book, but what a lot of people don't realize is that medicine in the day-to-day life, being a doctor, is all about learning your patient's stories as well. I mean, there's a reason we call it the history. It's because, the anecdotes and the narrative of their lives are what really shape their health and their approach to health and your ability to help them. And language is extremely important in medicine, especially as a surgeon in the consent obtaining process. Like if I'm prepping someone for the surgery, I need them to be truly aware of what the risks and benefits of those surgery are, so that number one, they go in with their eyes open, and number two, they're prepared if there are any complications, because every surgeon, no matter how good they are, if they operate a lot, they're going to have complications. And in many ways, that sort of influenced why I wrote my first novel, because my first novel is called None of the Above, and and I like to think of it as my baby novel, because in many ways it's a novel I don't know if I would have written today. But it was an important novel because it was based on a patient that I treated who was intersex, who was neither male nor female, but born with a body that didn't conform to nature's quote definition of male or female. She had a chromosomal abnormality, and I actually was involved in a surgery on her that it turns out my attending had not thoroughly prepped her for. So she came out not being aware of all the consequences of the surgeries that we did to remove basically gonads or testes in someone who was XY but externally looked female. So that directly led to my inspiration and my driving need to write None of the Above. Conversely, medicine really inspired This Is My Brain in Love because, as a physician and a mother, I really, really struggled with that balancing of my mental health with my profession, because medicine can at times be both like jubilant when you're healing someone, but also challenging because not everything goes well. And so learning how to take care of myself and learning how to balance all of the work I do, but still being able to be present for my family was really important. And it was really important for my kids to know that mental illness is something that can happen to anybody, and that as long as you can recognize it and treat it, it's an overcomable, and you can still live a happy and productive life. And that's what made me write This Is My Brain in Love.
And we'll get to Abigail, but just really quickly, because I am doing such in-depth research on intersectionality, you mentioned doing what I would call proper and culturally humble assessment. What are some of the ways that you ask these questions? Because even for clinical psychologists, it can be really sensitive and can come off as offensive if we are coming from the perspective of, I am better, I am the expert in your experience.
So whenever I, for instance, explain an intervention or suggestive medicine, I never say, this is what I'm going to prescribe you. I always say, is your problem bad enough that you'd want to try to consider medicine? Or is it bad enough that you'd want to try to consider surgery? Because I really consider shared decision-making to be part of good medicine. Because you can recommend whatever you want, but if the patient doesn't want to do it or has economic or religious barriers to it, then there's never a way you're going to get them to where they need to be health-wise.
That's a great point. So Abigail, Loveboat, tell me more about Loveboat and kind of how you've developed these stories and characters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. So it's just so fun to hear Eileen share her story. So Eileen and I actually have been critique partners since I think 2007,
Oh,
and we
no.
actually have a lot of similarities. We met at a writing conference, and she was trying to balance writing and this medical practice, and I was a lawyer and balancing that with my writing. And so I think that was something that kind of connected us, as well as like being the moms of young children. So very similarly as Eileen, like I grew up loving to read. Laura Ingalls was one of my favorites, C.S. Lewis. I loved Harry Potter. And I wanted to live in those books. I wanted like those characters to be my best friend. And I think deep down inside me, though, I knew that if I did drop into Laura Ingalls' world, her mother wouldn't like me. and or her mother who was actually racist against Native Americans,
Right.
and Laura herself, who is an extremely open-minded character, would have probably had a lot of questions for me that I wouldn't have felt comfortable with. And as like I think as a child growing up in Ohio, I wasn't that comfortable with my Asian identity, and she might have had questions about like where I came from or what I look like that I wouldn't have been equipped to answer. And so there was, I think, kind of a deep sadness in me that this family, this community that I love so much, I could never really be accepted by. So as I began writing, though, for many years, I did not actually know I could write an Asian American main character, and that was, Eileen and I were early in the industry, and it was a time when people were asked to change their Asian characters to white characters for marketing purposes, and there actually is a story in our community about that of someone who had to do that in order to get her book deal. And so I wrote 4 novels on the way to Loveboat Taipei, and almost none of them had Asian American main characters. I think the last one had a Hapa character. But I went to the Vermont College of Fine Arts, and that's where I really found my voice as an author, where my amazing faculty just really encouraged me to like write stories from my own community and from my own experience. And that was really eye-opening for me. So that ended up leading to Loveboat Taipei. It is the story of a teenage girl, Ever Wong, 18 years old, who goes from Ohio to Taiwan. Her parents send her kicking and screaming to this language and cultural exchange program. She does not want to go. She wants to stay home and dance with her best friend and hopefully apply for the scholarship. But what she finds on the boat actually is this kind of summer free-for-all where the kids have no parental supervision. She's dropped off in this foreign land. The kids go wild. They sneak out clubbing. They drink snake blood sake.
So basically a parent's worst nightmare. And I have 2 girls. So I'm just like, oh God, one of them's going to outdoor ed. And like, obviously they're in elementary school, but I'm just like, as you're describing all of this, I'm like, oh God, I don't even want to get to that point where we have to send them on little vacations with friends.
Absolutely. The people always ask me, would you send your kids to Loveboat? I'm like, why don't you read the book first and see what you think? So I actually went on this program. It was a real program. It was started in the 1960s to encourage overseas Chinese and Taiwanese youth to get in touch with their culture. And I think it did exactly that. So, my character had a similar journey to me in that she found all these Asian Americans who were proud of their cultural heritage. And it was very healing for me. And, similarly, it's healing for Ever to understand her parents' culture and also that she has roots and where she came from and what it means to be a girl between cultures. And she also has another journey, which actually ties more into like some of the mental health issues that I know we're going to discuss as well. So Loveboat Taipei had like 30 different Asian American characters. And that was such a fun project to write because I got to explore, the characters outside of being Asian American. That wasn't the feature that made them unique. Whereas I think for so long, if there was the Asian character, they were like the Asian character and they embody everything about being Asian. But now with my characters, my 30 characters, they could just be themselves. Like someone's a dancer, someone's funny, someone's like falling in love with all the wrong people. And at the same time, with 30 different Asian American characters, you could also find out what is uniquely Asian American about them. And that's, being between cultures, this tension that we have between our parents' culture and our culture, if you're, from different sides of the immigration process, and also the centrality of family and how strong a hold family has over you. So it was really a fun thing to do.
And I think the former of really looking at us and the characters as people is it's aspirational. That's where we essentially want to be. And at the same time, like you said, we also don't want to erase our experiences, our ancestors' experiences. So I love the fact that that you have and are addressing all those issues. And, I will go back to Eileen, but thinking about this, the first book is going to be adapted to the big screen. And so how do you ensure that these characters are truly captured based on your writing? Because even with Harry Potter, right, there's so many nuances of the book, and my daughter will be like explaining different things that weren't explained in the movie. Obviously, I think ultimately they did a really great job on the movie to really convey the different characters' personalities. But I'm always curious as to how that jump happens.
Yeah, well, so I can't speak specifically to the film because we're still in post-production. But what I can say is, what is the process of adapting a book to the film, to the screen? And really, the main thing is you take a 400-page novel and you condense it into a 100-page script, which is about 22,000 words. So it's a huge reduction. Like Loveboat Taipei is about 100,000 words. So, it's like a fifth of the word count. But it's, at the same time, you have the medium of film, which, a picture's worth 1,000 words, a video is worth even more. So I think I really enjoyed leaning into what is unique about the particular medium. And so with the writing, you get to go deep with the characters and you learn about what's their inner life about, what are they thinking about, the interiority. That's really hard to capture in a film unless you do a lot of voiceover, which you still don't have enough words for that. On the flip side, in a film, you can showcase the beauty of a city, dance or other kinetic type activities. You can really see the physicality of that. And I think that's really fun. So I think for me, as I think about all my different projects, because I have like 10 different projects now, and some of them are like, there's a graphic novel, there are other film and TV things. I have some other like kind of hybrid projects that are really fun. And so for me, it's always fun to see like, what is it about that particular medium? Like, where does that medium intersect with the story that I'm trying to tell? And like, what can I do to kind of maximize that part of it?
Absolutely. So Eileen, jumping back in your second book, you really have two characters that are coming together, and you decided to write it in a way that both characters have a voice, so to speak, like it's from two perspectives. How were you able to navigate that and also pack in the mental health, the intersectionality, the dynamics of all the characters? It's very, if you look at it from an objective standpoint, it's a tall order.
Yeah, it was very, very important for me from the beginning to write the point from dual perspective, using dual narrative, two voices. And part of that is because, one of the things that took me so long to understand was the concept that your brain is not your friend. And I don't know if this is a family-friendly podcast, but in the book, I asked, one of my characters says, your brain is just being an asshole. And the technical term for that in psychology is the idea of a cognitive distortion.
Yes.
And it's such a powerful tool that people use in cognitive behavioral therapy, so identifying these distortions. And so it was really, really important for me to be able to write the story in a way that you can see the same incident, the same scene from two different perspectives, each of which is distorted from a different cognitive distortion based on their mental illness, whether the one character who has anxiety and the other character who has depression. It was also really important for me to write a book where the Asian American was not the monoline minority. Because both Abby and I have struggled with this, our lives being pigeonholed based on people's perceptions of who we are, just because of how we look. And so it was really important for me in this book for it to not be the Asian American girl who was the one getting straight A's, who was from a rich family, but it was actually, the African American boy who, whose parent was a doctor, who lived in the fancier house and who was the straight edge student, in some part because of his anxieties, which sort of lead to his, borderline obsessiveness in an analytical mind. But it was really important for me to invert those paradigms, much in the way that I think Abby does in Loveboat Taipei. I feel that in addition to that paradigm being subverted, I liked the idea of having, the one parent be the supposed, cheap Asian guy, who in the end is the one who's most generous. And then there's the wise old woman who in the end is actually the most cheeky and does the kind of the most outrageous thing, because we all contain those multitudes as people. And it was really important, especially from the perspective of intersexual mental health, to in the end have a way for the seemingly perfect, submissive mother that was the main character's mother, to also be able to prove her own vulnerability by revealing her own mental illness, which is, I think, a big taboo in all Asian cultures, but particularly between parent and child because of the lack of communication and openness about mental illness.
Or even the language, right? Because I think there's an aspect of quote unquote the immigrant mentality of just keeping your head down and continuing to work. And we have so many similarities, and also obviously we're individual people, but getting doctorates, being mothers, being Asian, I think there's a lot of different aspects that we connect on here. And so how do you manage a lot of these dynamics, even in your own life? Because we cannot hide our minority status when we are in these different environments, or even in the writing rooms, right? And I'm glad that you guys have this wonderful partnership. But I imagine that when you were going still into these white spaces, you still see this, you know?
Yeah, it's hard. It is really hard, and we're not there yet. Both Eileen and I have come through the ringer in our professions. Like we've come out on top, but it's taken a toll for sure. And I think you just need partners, but you also need a therapist. I was there have been times when I actually had 3 therapists called in one day, like 3 different therapists, like one a coach, and different, just kind of addressing different issues with me because there was so much stress. And I think over time I found like having therapy, and I've been in therapy like for probably 20 years now for various things. But you build the tools to kind of tackle the next hurdle. And I'm just so grateful for how much I've learned over the years. But I think that's something that we don't talk about in Asian American cultures. Like it's both of us, at the time we were writing, recognized that there was a stigma about talking about mental health issues in the community that we both wanted to push against. So in Loveboat, Taipei, it turns out Rick has a depressed girlfriend who tried to commit suicide. And at the time I was writing Loveboat, there was a rash of suicides at our local high school, and nobody knew why that was happening. It was like all these teens, and I don't think anyone has the answer to it, but I think part of my writing the Loveboat Taipei, where these kids could go crazy for the summer, test boundaries, and try to figure out who they were, was in some ways a response to what was happening there. And then with Rick's, depressed girlfriend, in the end, part of her arc is that she has to find the courage to go and get therapy and get help, because I think that's really the first step. Identify it, and seeking out help and asking for it.
Yeah. I mean, in my own life, it's particularly ironic that as a physician, it took me years to finally feel like I deserved to get treatment for my depression. And so I write about this a little bit in my afterwards about how, I've been on and off of antidepressants since college, since my first depressive episode. And the funny thing is that, every time I start feeling better, I'm like, oh, I don't need it. It's okay. As if that needing to take that medication was a sign of weakness. And it took until I was on my 3rd round of depression in residency. I had finished medical school, right? And, I had passed my boards. I was an MD. And at one point, my therapist was just like, Eileen, you can go back on your antidepressants. Your brain needs serotonin.
Yes.
And that's where I couldn't believe it. I would never deny a diabetic patient insulin. Why was I denying myself this medication, this chemical that my brain and my body needed? And I thought a lot about this. I thought a lot about language, as we said, and the term mental illness, and how saying it's just a mental thing is such a misnomer, because when you're depressed, your body feels it.
It's interconnected.
Endocrinology, hormones, thyroid disorders can cause depression. Anxiety is a physical reaction with your heart rate, your breath, your skin tone, like the sweat glands. It's like a very the whole term. It's almost like we need another term for mental illness that acknowledges how it's a very physical, like biological condition.
Absolutely. And we've seen this in the pandemic, right? I think it's kind of more in your face now, in that when people were isolated, deprived of social interaction. And I want to go back to what you said, kind of like this idea, well, I'm done with medical school, I'm an MD. And then I thought back to my own experience, and it's like, now it's real life. We're practicing under our own license. We're responsible for other trainees and other residents. And I think that brings an extra level of stress. And I'm super grateful for you both talking about your experiences with medication and therapy, because this is why essentially I do the work in this podcast, right? Is to like have these real conversations that people need help. People do seek help, and it doesn't need to be this secretive aspect. I often say a good therapist needs a good therapist. And unfortunately, I mean, even in your different realms, not all providers and not all professionals are created equal, meaning that there are ones that are just better fits for the issues that we're presenting with, or even that interpersonal bedside manner. I don't think I could work with someone who just kind of completely glosses over my experiences as an Asian American woman in this field, a young one who started right out of, I went to college to PhD to then being, after residency in a leadership role and having to manage people like double my age. And they're like, who is this little woman? Right.
Yeah. No, I still get, that how many of these have you done thing? And I'm
Yeah.
like, girl, do you see how many gray hairs I have now?
Oh, I dye mine. So that's not going to be an issue. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up that neurodivergent aspect of experiences. And again, I keep saying intersectionality because I really want to dispel this myth that it's just a buzzword, and this idea that it's not just about being a certain ethnicity or culture, but it's being a part of marginalized groups. And one of them is, maybe being diagnosed or undiagnosed with a learning disability and having to go through school. There's that extra pressure, like we talked about, of Asian Americans need to be, at the top of their game, getting A's and A pluses, whatever. I think big in our high school in the Bay Area, and Abby, you live in the Bay Area now, at Lowell High School, it was like everyone wanted to go from Lowell to UC Berkeley. And if you didn't, man, that's lower tier. And I did not. I went to UC Santa Cruz, which I feel like was such a better fit for me and not having anxiety about being a part of this model minority vibe. But I think that that's really important because with intersectionality, there's all these aspects of education really does impact our ability to thrive. And so I even don't want to erase, the experiences of Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and Black, African American, et cetera, that when we're doing these assessments, it really is impacted by the access to resources. And so what do you feel would be really helpful in real life for people to know, for parents to know of folks that may be struggling with some of these issues?
Yeah, so I think knowledge is so powerful. We have learning differences in my family, and we didn't know. I think this is actually how I found out. Oh, I have the same because when I was like, just growing up with the young new family members, and just realizing, oh, they had these similar tendencies that I had. I think that's probably why I wrote the books I did. I wanted people to see like, oh, this is actually maybe not as uncommon as you realize. And I think the problem with being immigrants is that was the first thing people saw about us. Oh, she's Asian, right? So for Sophie Ha, she actually, it's never in the books, but she has undiagnosed ADHD, and she's kind of a tornado. And people react to her being a tornado, but it's actually very common for minority women, minority girls in particular, to not be diagnosed because
Yes.
teachers assume that they're behaving that way because they're a minority girl, or if they have like an ADHD that's not hyperactive, they're just kind of quiet and overlooked in the corner. They're dreaming, and their mind is daydreaming away. And similar with Xavier, like so in the book, he was not diagnosed with dyslexia because his teacher thought he just couldn't speak English that well, and it was his second language, and so they think that was the struggle, and not that there was actually something else going on. So I think that first step is really just awareness of what it looks like. Don't be afraid of talking to the schools, like because I think I hear that too. Parents don't want their schools to find out their kid might have a learning difference because they're
They don't want to
worried
be
that the school
labeled. Yeah.
they don't want to be labeled, they don't want to be tracked, they don't want to be prejudiced against because they've already experienced so much as a minority. But then your kid doesn't get the help they need, and it's so heartbreaking to hear about autistic kids whose parents are hiding it from the schools. And like it's really not necessary in the United States because we really do have a strong support system now.
Yeah. Even that, it's been so stretched by the pandemic. I mean,
Yes.
Abby, after talking to you, I actually did I was trying to get neuropsych testing for my kid, and every place I called was booked out 6 months in advance.
Wow.
And, of course, we would always have a conflict, and it got pushed back another 6 months. So now this testing that I requested like last fall is pushed to this August.
Wow.
I think we're going to have to
Wow. A
push it
year.
back again. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
heartbreaking. But luckily there's this horrible, amazing thing called the internet. And like, I have to admit that there are some amazing, online resources out there, particularly regarding ADD. I feel like ADHD, there's a lot of good stuff, a lot of good, webinars, parent
Support.
groups, and like actual legit, resources to find ADD friendly therapists, and tangible resources, especially in the school setting. Ways to make learning, uh, the the learning options more accessible, and friendly. Simple things like, one of my kids' friends, always has headphones, during study hall to help them focus. So I mean,
Mhm.
I,
Yeah.
I do think that, there's a lot more information out there, more readily accessible, but the bad part is, of course, it's harder to filter out the good from the bad.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There is actually a lot of small things that you can do that help. So with ADHD, like having a fidget goes a long way. It's like the same thing with having the music. It's something that you can hold in your hand, or even like a scent to bring, attention back to the room. Taking photos of the board during class in case you spaced out and missed like part of the lecture. There's these live scribe pens now, which
Yep.
Xavier actually uses, that you can take notes, and it'll actually record, like, you can go back. It records it as you're writing it, so you can actually find like the parts that you may have missed and fill it in later. So there's really incredible resources out there, and people need just to, yeah, if you research, I think you'll find them.
And one last question that kind of popped in my head, because you've been critique partners for longer than some people's marriages. How
That's
do
such a
you?
funny way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been with my husband since high school, so it's going to be 23
Oh,
years this
amazing.
year. So not as long as that, but I'm wondering, how do you give each other honest feedback? Because a lot of times we are taught, like, oh, if you get critique, that's like, a B or a C. You know what I mean? Like in
Oh,
people's
Eileen gave
minds.
me a B one time. Eileen did give me a B.
Yeah.
It was my very first novel, and I said, and after Eileen read, I was super nervous, and she gave me like all this like really, really, really constructive feedback. And then there's a sandwich, right? You positive,
Yes.
constructive, and then I was like, what grade would I get on this if I submitted it? And then she gave me a B, and I was like, okay, that hurts, but it's good to know that this is not ready for the world. No, I think that's absolutely what you do for a critique partner. It's like you don't let them go out there slip showing, because
Exactly.
once your book's published, like the whole world is going to see the same thing. So
Yeah.
you're not doing anyone a favor by not being honest.
We give harsh criticism of each other because we want the best for each other, and in many ways it's always easier to read someone else's stuff than to be the person writing it.
Sure.
And also when you are writing it, you get so close to it. What we need, we go to each other knowing that we need an unbiased eye, someone who hasn't been staring at these pages for months and months on ends, and have basically gotten completely desensitized to all of its flaws.
Yeah.
At the same
You just
time,
don't know
because
what's on the page anymore.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
at the same time, because we know that we're brutally honest with each other, it just makes it that much more sweeter, and we trust each other, so that when we say it's ready, so when I'm like, Abby, you need to send this out right now, she actually trusts me.
I was going to say, just built on trust. I think that's so important. I
Yeah.
had a young author on the show a little while ago, and she wrote a 700-page book. I mean, this person
Wow.
seems like an older soul in a young person's body. But she talked about that editing is the most painful process for her. And then even reading her stuff after it's published is just because you've been looking at it for so long. But I love that, right? Trust, honesty. And also, I don't know if anyone's cried at some point, but I think, it is being honest that, while that hurt, and like Abby said, I need to hear it. So, I'm really thinking a little bit about where folks can kind of learn more about you both, but also where can we find all these wonderful resources in the books and all those fun things.
Well, I still have a very outdated website, iwgregorio.com. I have to admit, I'm not on social media as much lately, partly because of my mental health, and partly because it's just another thing to manage. But I do have a resources page on my website, and both of my books have a lot of back matter with resources.
Yeah, no, I realized I didn't talk about my second book at all. So my second book follows two of the fan favorites from book one. Xavier Ye actually has undiagnosed dyslexia, and actually over the course of book two, he finds out he actually not only has dyslexia, he has something else too, that was also never diagnosed. And I think that was a problem in our community for years. Like, where if you don't acknowledge that there's an issue, you think it's something like his father just wishes he could will away his dyslexia. And I think just that unwillingness to recognize that, look, no, this person's brain is really different than other people's, and that creates both positive benefits, because Xavier actually is a filmmaker and he has a beautiful way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
But he also really struggles with putting words on a page and being able to read. So for that book, I do have resources for dyslexic youth in the back as well. And then I too have a website, abigailhingwen.com. I'm on social media everywhere at Abigail Hing Wen.
So thank you so much for both of you taking time out of your busy schedules and coming on the show. It's been an amazing conversation, and I feel like already that there will be mutual support in our groups and in our dynamics. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad. Yeah, thank you so much thank you for all the work that you're doing. It's so important.
Thank you for tuning in. Remember to support us for free by subscribing to our mailing list at colorsuccesspodcast.com. There, you will find our socials, YouTube channel, and all episodes on streaming platforms for great additional content. As Rob Heaps from Partner Track said, success is contagious, so come catch it.